He wasn't just rich, he was wealth incarnate. Augustus Caesar didn't play the money game, he invented it. Adjusted for inflation, territory, and resource control, fresh 2024-2025 economic estimates peg his empire's personal worth at over 4.6 trillion. That's trillion with a T. Forget Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates. Combine them, double it. Augustus still laughs from the grave, and not in gold coins, but entire civilizations. This wasn't inherited royalty or modern corporate hustle. This was raw, bloody conquest. One man who turned an ancient republic into his personal ATM, draining the wealth of continents, bleeding economies dry, and stacking power so high he was literally worshipped as a god on earth. And he started as a sickly, fragile, no-name teenager. But Augustus wasn't just born lucky. He built his trillion-dollar empire in the smoking wreckage of a broken republic, with betrayal as currency and murder as investment strategy. The Roman Empire at its peak was generating 25 to 30% of the entire world's GDP. And guess who personally owned the crown jewel of it all? Egypt, not Rome. Augustus. That's like if Jeff Bezos didn't just run Amazon, but personally owned China. He wasn't some dusty statue in a toga. This guy made hedge fund managers look like lemonade stand operators. He controlled taxes from hundreds of provinces. He bankrolled wars with a flick of his ring. And while today's billionaires dodge taxes, Augustus collected them with spears. He bought loyalty like candy, funded armies like poker chips. And when cities bowed, they didn't just cheer, they worshipped him. This man's signature literally meant life or death. One wave of his hand and thousands vanished, fortunes changed, or empires collapsed. You think private jets are flashy? Augustus could raise a navy in a day, throw week-long gladiator games just to impress one senator, or build a temple made of pure white marble just because his rival sneezed the wrong way. So, here's the burning question nobody wants to ask. When a man owns more wealth than any human in history, when he wields power like a demigod, when he turns democracy into dictatorship with a smile, was Augustus Caesar the greatest genius who ever lived, or the richest monster the world's ever created? We're diving deep. Blood, gold, betrayal, empire. Before he was Augustus, before the trillions, before the empire, before the god status, he was just a kid. Born Gaius Octavius on September 23, 63 BC, in a nowhere town south of Rome. Not a prince, not a prodigy, just a fragile boy with bad health and no throne in sight. But here's where it gets twisted, because that skinny, weak teen, he had iron ambition burning behind his sunken eyes. From the jump, Octavius was surrounded by bloodlines that whispered power. His mother, Attia, was Julius Caesar's niece. His grandmother, sister of Caesar's father. And while Caesar was out conquering Gaul and becoming a living legend, little Octavius was absorbing every rumor, every whisper of dominance that ran in the family veins like poison. Doctors thought he wouldn't make it past adolescence. Dude nearly died multiple times from illness. But he didn't just survive, he studied. He watched, he waited. Then came the break. A cosmic fluke, or was it something colder? Julius Caesar, the war god of Rome, noticed him. Of all the Roman elite, Caesar saw something in the teenage Octavius that no one else did. He brought him in, mentored him, treated him like a political son. Most thought it was symbolic, ceremonial. Caesar had no children after all. But behind closed doors, Caesar was sculpting a successor. Slowly, carefully. Now here's where it snaps from quiet kid to calculated shark. Octavius didn't ride into power on charm. He started showing his venom early. Historians now point to private letters and accounts showing a disturbing coldness beneath his politeness. He was a strategist in a snake pit, and he wasn't afraid to bite back. And the minute Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, stabbed 23 times by his own Senate, betrayed by men he dined with, Octavius was just 18 years old. Not a general, not a senator, just a scrawny teenager. You'd think he'd flee, hide, play it safe. Instead, he took the blood in the streets as a green light. Because Julius Caesar had just dropped a nuclear inheritance bomb. His will named this teenage ghost as heir to the entire Caesar fortune. Not partial, not shared, all of it. And with it came not just money, but legacy, name, and a Rome ready to explode. In a single sentence of legal ink, Octavius became Gaius Julius Caesar. He ditched his identity like a used cloak. No more Octavius. Now he wore the name of a godslayer, a war titan, and Rome was watching. He should have been a pawn. But instead he walked into a capital crawling with assassins, civil unrest and betrayal, and he walked in alone. Let this sink in. How many 18-year-olds would step into a city ready to kill them for a name? How many would gamble everything on a dead man's will? This wasn't bravery. It was something colder. A man who saw opportunity not in power, but in chaos. And this was just the prelude. Because next, he turns Caesar's inheritance into a weapon, builds alliances soaked in blood, and begins carving the empire, one dead rival at a time. When the will was read, Rome gasped and the assassins panicked. Julius Caesar hadn't left his empire to a seasoned general, a powerful senator, or even his mistress. He left it to Octavius, an 18-year-old nobody, and not just his fortune, but his name. The will legally adopted him posthumously as Gaius Julius Caesar, making him not just an heir, but a living extension of Rome's most dangerous man. This wasn't some family trust fund. We're talking about hundreds of billions in adjusted wealth, just from Caesar's loot in Gaul alone. Gold, land, slaves, temples, tribute, real estate stretched across Europe, with raw resources pouring in like rivers. Overnight, Octavius inherited not just riches, but power infrastructure, networks of loyal legions, regional governors, and political debts. But inheritance means nothing if you're dead. And every man who killed Caesar was now watching this teen step into the spotlight. Rome was boiling. Murders, riots, power grabs. It was a vulture's feast. The Senate tried to freeze him out. Mark Antony, Caesar's top general, tried to swallow the whole estate. Octavius could have played nice, could have disappeared. Instead, he declared war on every man who doubted him. He raised an army from Caesar's veterans, using the fortune they'd already bled for. He leveraged Caesar's name like a nuclear warhead, branding himself son of the divine. Let that land, a god's son, backed by gold, and just young enough to be underestimated. And Antony? He mocked Octavius, called him a child, said he'd crumble in Rome's political pit. Bad move. Octavius rolled into Rome not as a scared kid, but as Caesar reborn, a ghost with a ledger, hunting debts in blood. He bribed senators, he took loans, he bought influence. Every coin in Caesar's vault became a bullet. He didn't just claim power, he started outplaying Antony, the Senate, and Caesar's enemies simultaneously. That's not luck, that's raw psychological warfare. And while Antony and others squabbled, Octavius quietly forged an alliance with the unlikeliest devils, Antony and Lepidus. Together, they formed the Second Triumvirate, an unholy trinity with one goal: eliminate Caesar's killers and loot their estates. It wasn't justice. It was a hostile takeover. Imagine the scene. Rome descending into blood-drenched chaos as a teenage heir uses his inheritance to fund political murder, legal assassination, and financial conquest. His empire wasn't built on inheritance. It was built on execution lists. And the best part? Octavius played all sides. He used Antony's rage, Lepidus's connections, and Caesar's gold to fuel one of the most terrifying economic grabs in human history. He wasn't satisfied with Caesar's wealth. He wanted more. He wanted everything. And next, he gets it. How? By unleashing a storm of violence so cold, so calculated, it makes Wall Street look like kindergarten. We're talking state-sponsored murder for profit, elite extermination for estate seizure, and Rome's upper class couldn't stop it. He didn't just inherit a fortune. He hunted for more. Buckle up. Rome wasn't ready for what came next. The Second Triumvirate, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus, wasn't a peace pact. It was a kill list with a treasury attached. Their first move, a legalized massacre. They called it proscription. Sounds bureaucratic, right? It was blood-soaked robbery in broad daylight. They drew up lists, literal hit lists of Rome's richest and most influential. Senators, knights, businessmen, political rivals, anyone with land, gold, or grudges. And then they put a price on every head, thousands of them. The official excuse? Avenge Julius Caesar. But the truth? It was money. Cold. Brutal. Money. Over 300 senators and more than 2,000 equestrians, Rome's business elite, were executed, not for crimes, but because their estates were ripe for seizure. Their heads bought soldiers, their villas bought loyalty, their families erased. And leading the charge, the soft-spoken teen with Caesar's name. Octavian wasn't squeamish. He signed off on executions personally, including Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, and a man who once supported him. Cicero begged for mercy. Octavian didn't blink. This was no longer about inheritance. This was about power through extermination. Octavian turned murder into financial strategy. Every kill was a deposit. Every confiscated estate went straight into the imperial vault. We're talking about entire neighborhoods handed over to Octavian. Mansions, slaves, armories, art, land, farmland, port towns. Think of it this way. Imagine if a modern president legalized the murder of billionaires and took their bank accounts to fund his re-election. That's exactly what Octavian did, but scaled to an empire. He used this slaughter to reboot the Roman economy in his image. His face on coins, his name in temples, his word backed by rivers of stolen gold. And while Antony was off raging in the east and Lepidus played dead, Octavian was quietly building the skeleton of the empire. But not with votes, with corpses. Let's break it down. The total wealth absorbed from the prescriptions is estimated in today's money at well over $2 trillion. And that's conservative. Some historians put it higher, especially when factoring in compound control of ports, resources and trade routes. Octavian didn't just fund an army. He funded his future monarchy while wearing the mask of restoring the Republic. And the public? They watched as their elite vanished, their landlords gone, their bosses executed. And in the vacuum, a 19-year-old with Caesar's name and enough money to feed or destroy Rome. This wasn't revolution, it was hostile monopoly, and it worked. Because next, with his war chest dripping in blood, Octavian turns on his partners. The alliance cracks, the knives come out, and the only thing standing between him and total control is Cleopatra, and she's about to become the most expensive threat in Roman history. It all led here. The powder keg of civil war about to explode across the Mediterranean. Octavian, now a billionaire warlord with the Roman West under his thumb. Mark Antony, holed up in the east, entangled in silk sheets and Cleopatra's golden trap. Let's get one thing straight. This wasn't just politics. This was a full-blown power grudge soaked in gold and lust. Antony had once been Octavian's ally. Now, he was the only obstacle left between Octavian and total imperial dominance. And Antony was flexing, parading around Egypt like a sun god, playing emperor with Cleopatra at his side, throwing parties that made Roman senators puke with envy. And Cleopatra? Not just a queen, a walking fortune. She controlled Egypt's grain, its gold mines, and the Nile's trade arteries. Her wealth alone rivaled that of the entire Roman treasury. She wasn't a lover. She was a kingdom in a dress. Antony and Cleopatra declared their children kings of kings, carved up Roman client states like wedding cake, and made clear moves to challenge Rome's central authority. Octavian knew what they were doing. So he did what any trillionaire tactician does when someone threatens his bag. He declared war. But not on Antony. No, that would have been too honest. He declared war on Cleopatra, a foreign queen. Why? Because Romans weren't ready to kill one of their own, but killing an Egyptian seductress whispering in his ear? That was theatre. That was patriotic. And so the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, the defining clash that would decide whether Octavian became emperor or disappeared into a footnote. Picture this, a massive sea battle off the coast of Greece. Octavian's Admiral Agrippa brings fire and steel. Antony and Cleopatra's ships, loaded with treasure, chained together to protect their wealth, literally weighed down by gold. In the chaos, Cleopatra flees with her war chest. Antony follows like a whipped dog, his navy abandoned and burning. The empire watches it all collapse. This wasn't just defeat, it was public humiliation. Weeks later, cornered in Alexandria, Antony and Cleopatra both commit suicide. But not before Cleopatra tries to negotiate with Octavian, offering him everything, her throne, her riches, her empire. If he spares her, he takes the treasure, not the queen. Octavian marches into Egypt, not as a conqueror, but as owner. Egypt doesn't become a Roman province, it becomes his private property. Let that hit. Egypt wasn't Rome's, it was his. The entire kingdom, its gold, its taxes, its population, 1/5 of the empire's GDP, owned by a single man. No emperor, king, or CEO in history has ever pulled that move, not even close. And with Egypt came more than treasure, it came with legitimacy. Octavian was now beyond question. His enemies were gone, his rivals dead, his war chest overflowing. The world's richest woman was buried, and in her place rose the richest man who's ever lived, holding power so absolute, so unmatched, the modern mind can barely process it. But he wasn't finished. When the dust of Actium settled and Cleopatra's gold-lined tomb was sealed, Octavian didn't just walk away with a victory. he walked away with an empire wired directly into his bank account. This wasn't a political win. It was the moment he flipped the global economy into his personal vending machine. Egypt, the breadbasket of the ancient world, wasn't annexed into the Roman Republic like other territories. No, Octavian made it his private estate. Every bushel of grain, every brick of gold, every ounce of lapis lazuli mined in the desert flowed straight to him. Not to the Senate, not to the people. Him. Just to paint this right, Egypt accounted for nearly 30% of the world's GDP at the time. In today's terms, that's like one man personally owning India, half of Europe, and the oil fields of Saudi Arabia combined. This wasn't imperialism. This was outright economic domination. Octavian, soon to be crowned Augustus, now controlled more wealth than any pharaoh, emperor, or Wall Street cabal in history. He didn't need to ask for taxes. He collected them personally. The mines of Spain, under his generals. The grain of Africa, routed through his ports. The tribute from eastern provinces, delivered straight into his treasury like rent. And he didn't stop there. He began a slow, methodical transformation of the Roman system, not for the people, not for the Senate, but to centralize every coin under his thumb. He refused to take the title king, but don't let that fool you. That was a branding move. He called himself Princeps, first citizen. But everyone knew he was emperor in everything but name. And now, with Cleopatra's treasure vaults bursting, Octavian pulled his next masterstroke. He paid off the army, massively. He gave land to the veterans. He pumped gold into public works, not because he was generous, but because he could. Buying loyalty became a lifestyle. Then came the Senate. Rather than crushing them outright, he let them exist as decoration. He played the role of humble servant of Rome while sitting on a treasury bigger than entire continents. This fake modesty made him look noble, while everyone else looked greedy. And the people? They loved him. Bread flowed. Games dazzled, taxes shrank for the commoners. Why? Because Egypt's wealth covered the tab. Let's get specific. Modern scholars and economists using the latest 2025 economic data models estimate Augustus's personal net worth post-Egypt at $4.9 trillion adjusted for today. That's not state money, that's his family, his name, his empire. No hedge fund, no oil dynasty, no royal house in history, not even close. The man controlled oceans of wealth while presenting himself as the first among equals. Genius? Absolutely. Manipulative? Without question. He became emperor not by force, but by out-earning, out-strategizing, and outlasting every man in his path. And now that he had it all, he wrapped it in marble. You've been told Augustus was humble, a man of the people, a leader who lived simply. That's the propaganda. Here's the truth. Augustus ran the Roman Empire like a cash-printing machine, and he was the only one holding the switch. After Actium, he didn't just sit back and enjoy his winnings. He scaled the business. Think Apple, Amazon, and the entire Chinese economy rolled into one man's pocket. That was Augustus. He expanded Rome's reach to its maximum territorial height, sucking in new provinces, new tribute systems, new slave markets. North Africa, Judea, Gaul, Hispania, Illyricum, Pannonia. Every direction he pushed brought in more gold, more grain, more bodies to tax. And make no mistake, he didn't do this for Rome. He did it for Augustus Incorporated. Let's break down how he raked in cash. First, tribute. Every conquered territory had to pay him just to exist. And this wasn't a one-time shakedown. It was annual, like a subscription service to not get burned to the ground. Then, customs taxes. A cut from every ship, every caravan, every sack of spice or bolt of silk entering Roman borders. These routes were militarized, patrolled by Augustus's soldiers, guarded like vaults, and everything passed through his fiscal checkpoints. Next, mines. Silver in Spain, gold in Dacia, iron and copper in the Alps. All protected by Roman legions, all feeding directly into the imperial treasury. And then the slave trade. Conquests brought millions of enslaved people into Roman borders. Forced labor that built roads, harvested crops, staffed palaces, and enriched Augustus at every turn. Every body was a profit unit. Every child born into slavery? Compound interest. Now here's the real kicker. By 2025, economic models, including the latest data from Oxford's Historical Wealth Conversion Project, Augustus's empire was generating the equivalent of $24 billion a year in surplus, and he kept most of it. No shareholders, no parliament. Just one man at the top of the pyramid. That's not leadership. That's financial tyranny with a smiling face. And how did he spend it? He claimed to live in a modest house on the Palatine Hill. Simple walls, no gold leaf. Spartan furnishings. Just a citizen among citizens. Bullshit. Because behind the curtain, Augustus was commissioning entire marble cities in his name. The Forum of Augustus, the Temple of Mars Ultor, the Ara Pacis, colossal monuments of power and legacy, all financed with blood money. He controlled every coin minted. His face, his slogans, his victories. He even reformed the currency system to stabilize inflation, not for the economy, but to make his empire's value bulletproof. His wealth wasn't just hoarded, it was weaponized to buy favor, silence critics, fund surveillance, influence art, religion, even language. He didn't just own land, he owned culture. And while Rome celebrated his modesty, he was sitting on vaults of treasure Cleopatra herself had called excessive. Augustus played the greatest illusion in economic history. Act poor, stay adored, rule rich. Let's rip the mask off. Augustus didn't spend like a ruler. He spent like a god buying reality. You think Super Bowl ads are expensive? Try throwing 17,000 gladiator fights across your career just to show people who's boss. That's not metaphor. That's verified fact. Augustus gave Rome decades of blood-soaked entertainment, each event costing what would today be hundreds of millions, if not billions. And he didn't blink. But here's the psychological twist. He didn't flaunt it openly. He wrapped these billion-dollar spectacles in the cloak of public service. For the people, he'd say. To restore glory. Yeah, right. Let's break this down in modern terms. Augustus dumped an estimated 25% of his personal fortune into infrastructure. Not because he loved aqueducts, but because every brick bought another decade of loyalty. Roads, ports, temples, markets. He made Rome a gleaming temple to himself. And here's the sinister brilliance. Every time a Roman walked into a new marketplace, they didn't see a donor plaque. They saw his name carved into the stone. Every improvement was a branding campaign. Augustus wasn't just emperor. He was everywhere. He personally financed the military's retirement fund, 150 million sesterces, which translates to billions today. He understood that gold wasn't just for buying things, it was for buying people. Veterans worshipped him. Senators feared him. The poor adored him, and he fed the mob like no billionaire ever has. Free grain distributions, money giveaways, public lotteries where Augustus himself would throw coins into the crowd, literally throwing money at his problems, and the crowd begged for more. Now let's talk style. You've heard he lived in a modest house. That's what the history books say. But zoom out. He built entire districts in his name. Temples coated in gold leaf, obelisks dragged from Egypt, libraries stocked with scrolls he'd censored, all while presenting himself as a minimalist. He even bragged in his Res Gestae, "I found Rome a city of bricks. I left it a city of marble." That wasn't humility. That was branding genius. He made excess look like virtue. And while modern leaders pose for cameras on construction sites, Augustus was re-engineering the optics of power. Every parade, every game, every fountain sprayed the message, Rome is Augustus. Augustus is Rome. And the kicker? He wasn't spending Rome's money. He was spending his own. He made sure every denarius came from personal funds, which just happened to come from the empire he owned outright. A financial loop so tight, so seamless, it still confuses scholars today. This wasn't philanthropy. This was neural programming. Augustus used wealth to rewire the Roman psyche, and it worked. Because what happens when people love the man who took their freedom? They give him more. By now, you get it. Augustus didn't just build an empire, he engineered reality. But here's where it gets disturbing. Because Augustus didn't just conquer territories or bankroll armies, he invaded people's minds, their values, their families, their bedrooms. Let's start with his moral reforms. Sounds noble, right? Laws to restore Roman virtue. But pull back the curtain, and it's social surveillance on a scale the KGB would envy. He criminalized adultery, penalized bachelors, forced widows to remarry, promoted childbearing like it was a military campaign. Why? Because an empire built on conquest needs more Romans, more soldiers, more taxpayers, more obedient citizens. But get this, his own daughter Julia was exiled under these same moral laws for sleeping with the wrong men. A scandal Augustus weaponized for control. He banished her to a remote island, let her starve in disgrace, and never looked back. He turned family into propaganda, and then crushed his own bloodline when they threatened the illusion. And speaking of illusions, Augustus's propaganda machine was decades ahead of its time. He controlled poets, playwrights, historians. If you wrote something that contradicted his divine image, you were erased, or worse. He commissioned Virgil's Aeneid, a national epic that paints him as the heir to Trojan destiny, not a ruler, a mythological necessity. You weren't just living under Augustus. You were living inside his narrative, and every law, every statue, every public show was calculated for psychological effect. He wasn't feared like a dictator, he was loved like a savior. And that's way more dangerous. Because here's the masterstroke. He never declared himself emperor. He let the Senate vote him powers little by little until, surprise, he had absolute control for life. And then passed it down. That's not democracy. That's addictive authoritarianism dressed in civic robes. Now let's talk about his enemies, or what was left of them. He didn't torture them. He erased them, quietly, permanently. He'd exile, silence, or marry off threats into obscurity. No blood on the steps, just surgical annihilation. And while all this was happening, he still ran the largest cash empire in history, still collected tribute from 50-plus provinces, still received personal shipments of Egyptian gold and Nubian ivory, still controlled the grain that fed 1 million Romans. He was a totalitarian billionaire Pope King. And the people? They cheered, they chanted, they built statues and temples in his name while thanking him for their rations. Why? Because he didn't rule with fear. He ruled with psychological saturation. So now ask yourself, was this wealth built on genius, or was it built on genocide-level manipulation? 2,000 years later, you still see his face. Not literally, but in every system built to look like a democracy while functioning like a cartel. In every politician who promises modesty but dines on gold. In every billionaire who claims to be self-made while milking a government contract. That's Augustus, still echoing. You think Musk, Bezos, or Gates are rich? They dream of the margins Augustus played with. His wealth wasn't speculative, it wasn't digital, it wasn't vulnerable to markets, it was territorial, resource-based, militarily enforced. He didn't own companies, he owned nations. Let's drop the final hammer. The latest 2025 World Economic Histories Review places Augustus as the single wealthiest human in recorded history. Not an emperor, not a CEO, not a pharaoh, but a category of his own. Supreme individual wealth holder, they called it. How rich? Let's compare. Elon Musk tops the Bloomberg Billionaires Index with an estimated net worth of about $381 billion as of May 2025. Jeff Bezos ranks third globally with around $220 to $243 billion, depending on source. Forbes cited $226 billion, other outlets $243, $6 billion. Bill Gates, long off the top spot, has an estimated net worth of about $135 billion as of early 2025. Augustus, $4.9 trillion adjusted. With real hard assets, grain, gold, slaves, taxes, armies, not stocks, not crypto, not Silicon Valley air. This man's daily passive income from imperial revenues would still fund the entire Pentagon's annual budget today, with change to spare. And here's the sick twist. All that wealth, untaxed, unregulated, unopposed. He didn't just die rich, he died unchallenged. At 75, in his villa in Nola, surrounded by loyalists, temples and tributes. Not assassinated, not overthrown, not even disgraced, worshipped. His last words? Have I played the part well? Then applaud as I exit. That wasn't modesty. That was a mic drop from a man who played Rome like a one-man show. His successor, Tiberius, didn't inherit an empire. He inherited a machine, already running, already feeding, already programmed to keep Augustus's ghost alive. And we're still living in that machine. Presidents crowned with public love. Billionaires who pledge to give back while owning tax systems. Militaries that guard trade. Media that tells stories their rulers paid for. All copied from his blueprint. So here's the final question. Was Augustus Caesar the greatest genius the world's ever known? Or the first true dictator, who proved that with enough gold, enough charm, and enough control over the narrative, you can make the world love its own submission? He didn't just die rich, he died a god.